When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous. About the past and about the future.
What's new, pussycats? That's right, we're back at Draftvice. And today we're doing a couple of lovely kitten-flavored teams, right? And we're doing the Carolina Panthers. But before we get on to the Carolina Panthers and Matt Rhule and Dave Tepper and Marty Herney, we're going to do the Cincinnati Bengals, right? And their number one overall pick, and they picked at the top of each round. They did not trade down. And but unfortunately, I felt like I felt like I couldn't just do this on my own, right? So I brought on a guest, a friend, if you will. He's been on the show before. He was supposed to be on another episode or two. The problem is that I'm an idiot. But hey, you know what? Outside of the two episodes he should have been on and the two episodes he's already been on, let's welcome onto the show Mr. Coby Rich. So
thank you for having me. How you doing?
Good, you?
Yeah, I'm all right.
So, yeah, I had you on to discuss the Eagles. I screwed up. You did amazing. Just I am an idiot as things go. So instead of doing the Eagles and the Ravens, like who needs birds, we'll go with the Tiger team. We'll go with the Bengals. And as such, the number one overall pick in this draft. How did you feel about their draft as a whole? Like, we'll just go right off the top, and we'll kind of start spreading through the whole team and what they've done.
Well, I'm a huge Joe Burrow fan. He's actually my my screensaver on my phone. I don't know if it's going to come up. But I loved him at LSU. I think he's a brilliant player. I think he's probably one of the smartest guys out there and really understands the game and pretty much every throw.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're concerned about his arm strength, but I think his leadership and his athleticism and everything else overcomes that. And I think he's a no-brainer first overall pick, so they didn't mess up that one like we might expect the Bengals to.
Yeah, I think it was a little overblown about the arm strength there, especially because if you have an NFL level arm, this is the same question people have with Tua, right? Like, oh, does Tua have a strong enough arm? Does Burrow have a strong enough arm? We've seen guys have not rocket launcher arms do really well in the NFL.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, Tony Romo was decent in the NFL, didn't have a rocket launcher of an arm. Andy Dalton, the guy who Joe Burrow's replacing, has been pretty good. There's just Kirk Cousins. I wouldn't say it has the strongest arm in the world, and now maybe you want to go up to like one of the higher up elite guys. I don't, Tom Brady's had a good arm, but he's never he's and also having arm strength is kind of like it's relative, right?
Yeah.
It's not.
Like we've been as the years have gone on. Strong arm may have been 40 yards, then 50 yards, and now Patrick Mahomes can throw 75, and anyone who can't do that's considered a short arm.
Exactly. And not only that, but it's like, for instance, really what arm strength gets you is the velocity on the short and intermediate routes. And if there's anybody questioning Joe Burrow on short and intermediate routes, I want to know their name because I don't think anybody's ever questioned him on that ability. So is he going to be able to do the Carson Wentz thing where his knee's about to touch the ground and he launches it in midair? He doesn't even have feet on the ground and throws it 50 yards. Maybe not. Maybe, I don't know, but it doesn't sound like that's the tool in his belt. But there's other tools. Like, again, as a quarterback, you don't only have one tool. Like Lamar Jackson has different tools in his belt. And I liked Burrow. I liked his athleticism. I liked his pocket presence was very good. He knows how to read a defense. He's probably one of the few guys coming out of college who actually dealt with like high-level defenses and actually had to carry a team sometimes.
Yeah, my only real concern with him, and it's not a big one because you can't put that on him, is he had an incredible supporting cast. That entire offense is now on an NFL roster. He had all the time in the world to throw the ball. I think there was one play, I want to say, against Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
In the SEC championship where he had like 11 seconds to throw a ball, and he threw a touchdown, but still, that's not going to happen in the NFL. I don't think that's a knock on him. I think that's more just a credit to his teammates, but we'd like to see how he's going to fare against the not so perfect Bengals line.
Absolutely. I honestly didn't think the LSU offensive line was all that great. I didn't think Sadiq Charles was all that good. I thought Damian Lewis and Cushenberry were actually maybe better fit for different schemes than what they were in, and they weren't necessarily the best pass blocking interior O-linemen. They were very good run blockers and very good run blocking. And again, the tackle situation, even at the LSU level, like I did not think Sadiq Charles was all that great. I just did the Washington team the other day, and I was kind of like, I watched Sadiq Charles' tape. You guys are basically replacing Trent Williams with a trash can. Not that I think Sadiq Charles can improve, but I just did not think, even at the level that they were playing at, that he was like, I'm not saying he's a trash can. I think Sadiq Charles, if he gains a little bit of weight, like his technique's good, but I didn't think like he needed a little bit more junk in the trunk, if you will. So
and it's not like he's not. It's not that he's gonna. I'm sorry. It's not like he's gonna be lacking receivers in Cincinnati. He's got T. Higgins. He's got AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, and if John Ross can ever get healthy, he's got him.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it's not like he's going to be wanting for targets, not like he was at LSU. And LSU obviously had the three great receivers, but I think he's going to have a similar receiving core in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is being able to watch what he did when he didn't have time. He extended plays. He moved around. I actually think the best weapon that he had two great weapons. He had Jamar Chase, and I thought Clyde Edwards-Helaire was, like, there were three drivers in that offense. Like, I've been pretty vocal about I wasn't a huge Justin Jefferson fan. I think he's a good player, but Jamar Chase is a driver. Joe Burrow is a driver. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a driver in those offenses, and that's why I really liked Joe Burrow. Is you could just see him avoiding the pressure and moving around and making time for his guys and having good chemistry with everybody. I can definitely see him going to the NFL and being very good. It kind of reminds me a bit of like when Baker Mayfield came out, where you had a guy who, and honestly, I think he has a better, at least one season that's better than, like, his best season is probably better than any other quarterback that's ever come out of college.
Definitely, yes.
So, and then you also look at who he did it against. He did it in the SEC. He went and did it in the college football championship. There was not a moment on tape this year that made everybody go, "Well, that's clearly not what a high-end quarterback in the NFL looks like." He did everything really well. I appreciated his game. I love watching his game. I think that LSU offense was fun to watch. I think that was like that was the other spark to it. Especially after Tua got injured, you literally only had one, like, oh my God, this is electric offense at a certain point. And then their defense was good too.
Yeah, which is, you don't always get that with the other quarterbacks that come out, like Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray back-to-back, where Oklahoma QBs. Oklahoma's not exactly renowned for its defense, so they were always putting up a lot of touchdowns and stats and everything because they had to outrun their defense.
Yeah, and then also, even so with the Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield thing, they're also not going up against as much like good defensive competition. Like, that's why people make a big deal about certain conferences, how often you play how much you play Power 5 schools, how much you play the SEC. So that's why I think Burrow. I think this is probably the easiest eval to come out in years, as far as this guy's definitely got at least enough skills to be a good quarterback. I do question whether I like Zach Taylor, because I think he's kind of Captain Mayonnaise over there. I swear, I hated watching his press conferences. He just seems like a jar of mayonnaise doing an interview, which I don't know if you've ever interviewed mayonnaise, but it's not really, it's never very fun. It never gives you the answer you want. It's very like, okay, you're congealing now. I get it. But okay, listen, you mentioned T. Higgins before and wide receiver weapons. What did you think about the T. Higgins pick?
I liked it. I thought he was a first rounder for most of the year. I know with the rise of Jefferson and Ruggs that he kind of got pushed down a little bit, and Rager was picked over him and Ayuk was picked over him. But I think the fact that he went first pick of the second round, you can basically call that another first rounder. He's big. He has an incredible catch radius, and he made a lot of plays at Clemson. And I think that's just to go from Trevor Lawrence to Joe Burrow is a pretty good transition for T. Higgins, and I think he can learn from AJ Green, and I think that's a great pick.
Yeah, and in fact, Zach Taylor made a point at his press conference about how he actually, although he didn't really make the point, one of the reporters made the point of, hey, wasn't he catching passes from Joe Burrow in the offseason? And he was, but apparently Zach Taylor was like, yeah, we don't know how many passes he was catching. That wasn't why we did it. They liked him. They actually felt like he was a first rounder. They were very excited to get him. He was very high on their board. He has a good catch radius, and good hands, which is what they liked about him. I actually thought his route running he didn't have to run. He didn't run an enormous route tree, but I thought his route running was pretty decent for a guy who didn't do that. I also felt like he was very versatile. So you look at certain receivers and where they can play along the line of scrimmage. For instance, the guy who went right after him was Michael Pittman. I love Michael Pittman. Thought he was an elk. He reminds me of Mike Williams on the Chargers. So the difference, though, that I saw was I don't think you're running him out of the slot. I don't think you're running Michael Pittman, in certain like you're not running like crossing routes with Michael Pittman. He's a very certain type of receiver. I think what T. Higgins does very well, he's really good at the intermediate level, which, that's great. Like to be able to do that, especially in that offense, that's what they're attacking is the intermediate areas of the field, and also what Joe Burrow does very well. It's kind of you are matching two guys who work very well together. My only problem with it was they have A.J. Green, they have Tyler Boyd, and they have John Ross. John Ross, they just rejected his fifth-year option. They declined it, so he's got one more year with the team. Maybe they extend him afterwards, but they did not feel, especially as a top 10 pick, it's an expensive fifth-year option. They did not feel as of this moment they felt like they had to keep him. So they declined the fifth-year option. You have a lot of guys on that roster who are very similar. Like, honestly, T. Higgins, his floor or his, like, I feel like his medium or his floor to medium spot for me in the NFL is actually Tyler Boyd. So you have two of those guys on the roster, which, I mean, it's not like a horrible thing, but those guys they're decent enough route runners. They're good enough hands. Like, honestly, very... Now, again, you saw this maybe with Zach Taylor when he was under McVay, where he had Woods and Cooper Kupp. With both guys are good hands, good route runners, and they're kind of playing to the middle of the field. But I felt like there's just the ability. Those two guys are so similar. I felt a little weird by that pick, especially because you also have AJ Green, who's not really a burner anymore. Like he's not. I don't think he was ever a super burner, but he had speed to him. And none of those three guys really make me feel worried like about them stretching the field.
You see, what I think the mentality behind that pick was John Ross is unreliable. I don't think he's going to be on the team after this. Obviously, with them declining the fifth-year option.
Yeah.
Tyler Boyd, I think, is always best in the slot. And I think at the moment, while that might be true for T. Higgins, I think that he's raw enough that you can kind of mold him how you want. So I think that if you're going to mold him into a future AJ Green, with, I think, AJ Green's health in question, even with him coming back, I think you're building yourself a future AJ Green, and you're going to just take T. Higgins from the slot and put him outside and maybe look to receiver in the second or third round next year to get the third guy.
That's true. That actually sounds like a good plan. Maybe you're actually on the staff and I didn't know. And now you're here to sell me on this Bengals roster, which is good because I have a little bit of biases against the Bengals. Oh, actually, out of all the other AFC North teams, I feel like the Browns and the Bengals, it's not really as hostile as, say, like the Browns and the Steelers or the Bengals and the Steelers. Or even
because the Bengals have never been much of a threat, really. Neither of the Browns, for the most part. I think they're coming back now. Both teams have the potential to come back and be pretty good in the next couple of years. But before that, they were kind of both, no offense, the cellar dwellers. So there's not as much hatred there.
Well, even pre-2000, right? Like pre-2000, like pre-96, the Browns were kind of like the
Ravens.
They were they were pretty good. They were the high end ones. They were the ones going to the playoffs, but they were kind of like where the Bengals were a couple years ago, where like the Bengals, like when they had Andy Dalton, AJ Green, the decent offensive line with Zeitler and Whitworth, where they were a constant playoff team. So I just never felt like they were like crossing each other, like. But also, it just feels like there's a little bit more animosity between some of these teams. Like, again, the Steelers nobody likes the Steelers.
Oh, yeah.
And again, with the Browns and the Ravens, there's the history of it. The fans of the Browns are like, dude, that Super Bowl was our Super Bowl. Like, those are our players, and now they're over in Baltimore. And now, like, that there's that little bit of, at least for people who live in Cleveland who had to grow up with that history, that's something I know a lot of them like have the resentment towards. So there's more history between those other teams, whereas with the Bengals and the Browns, there's actually a similar, there's a tree from it. The coach from the Browns started the Bengals. There's a little bit more camaraderie or kindness, even though trades between division rivals still kind of a weird thing. Yeah. But so again, the T. Higgins pick, you like it a lot. I like it. I feel like there's other guys who I might have went for, but again, I'm not designing their offense. So Zach Taylor's the one designing, or whoever's the next coach. Joe Brady will probably be the one designing their offense, which will actually probably be the same offense, to be honest. But yeah, once they fire Captain Mayonnaise, they will probably bring in a decent head coach. Now maybe Captain Mayonnaise bulks up and becomes General Mayonnaise and becomes better. But I don't know. I'm not impressed. I wasn't impressed with him last year, but maybe it also sounded like they were like, you know what? There's this guy Joe Burrow coming out. Let's tank and get him, and they ended up doing it. It seems like. Listen, any last thoughts on Higgins? Because I know Higgins. Again, the one thing they did mention was that he comes from a winning program, and they got to be around Dabo Sweeney, and Sweeney went ahead and vouched for him. So, any last thoughts on the guy?
Nope. Just I think it was a solid pick.
Yeah, solid pick, good pick. Again, you don't know how much they really had offers to go ahead and trade down or anything like that. The other guy they drafted on day 2 was Logan Wilson, out of Wyoming, right? Linebacker, decent athleticism, but again, he's playing in a conference that's not really like a high-end conference. Former wide receiver and defensive back, was at the Senior Bowl, so they got a chance to meet with him. They didn't coach him at the Senior Bowl; he was on the other team, but they did get an opportunity to meet with him, interview him before the game. So it seems like they put a lot of value in that, which I do feel like this year, especially if you were at the Senior Bowl, you got a gold star because again, everybody was like, "Oh, I got more time to be face to face with this guy." So a lot of Senior Bowl prospects, I think, got pushed up the board. This one especially, I feel like they really liked him. What did you think of the pick with Logan Wilson?
All right. Well, I'm gonna make a comparison here. Who's the last Pacific Northwest-ish small school linebacker who's known for smarts and maybe not as much as athleticism to come out and be good in the NFL?
There's a few of those. I'm trying to think of the one. I know a couple of guys come out of Wisconsin. Wisconsin ends up having a few linebackers every year.
I'm going to go with Leighton Vander Esch.
The Boise State. Yeah.
I think he's a similar player. I think he's a solid, smart, maybe not the most athletic, but knows what he's doing on the field and will get there type of linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's the kind of guy you wanted to captain your defense in the future.
I definitely think that's their plan there. I think, and that's kind of how they spoke him. They were very high on him. They felt like he probably should have went higher, but they were targeting him. They were very happy that he got to them at 60, I think 66, or 65. So they were very happy that he got to them. They really liked T. Higgins. They really liked Joe Burrow. And again, this is a team that's had some questions at linebacker over the years, and they've needed to kind of fill out that roster. Like, they haven't had a decent linebacker in that room. Like, they had Nick Vigil there last year. Now he's kind of more of a backup level, like third linebacker kind of guy. Vontaze Burfict, like, okay, you want the guy breaking heads. At least they're afraid of your linebacker. Like, they might get mugged by him on the field, but like, again, like they haven't had a good linebacking core. Sounds like this draft, that was one of the it might not have been the intention, but that's what it looks like, because he's not the only linebacker they took. In fact, they took 2 other ones. Any thoughts on those 2 guys? Because they took Akeem Davis-Gaither, who was actually their next pick, top of the 4th round, more athletic guy. Again, another small schooler coming out of App State. And they also took a 7th round pick on Marcus Bailey out of Purdue.
So I think that the mentality behind all these, and I just want to say that being a college football fan, Marcus Bailey is one of my favorite players, just because he's a gritty, smart, semi-athletic guy, kind of like he's a Big Ten linebacker. It's what you expect.
Mm-hmm.
And I love those guys. But I think that the mentality behind these things is you got to slow down the Ravens' running game. That's the idea here. Long term, you might not be the best team next year. You're not going to be. But your offense is looking pretty solid. Your defense is the defense that Lamar had put in the spin cycle. So I think that Wilson especially, but the other 2 as well, you need someone who's going to be able to run laterally with Lamar and snuff out any rushing plays, like see it before it happens and get there, because otherwise he's going to run all over you.
And having multiple athletic linebackers definitely helps trying to take away that running element to his game. They also added to that defense in free agency. They went after Mackenzie Alexander and Trey Waynes out of the Minnesota. Yeah, I was gonna say the Vikingsburg, but Minnesota's the right words out of that. So yeah, they went for those guys. So they got some defensive backs back there as well. They definitely seem like the defense was a big deal here. I like their edge rushers though. I do like some of their D line. In fact, they let Andrew Billings, their nose tackle, leave in free agency. But a lot of the other D linemen, Hubbard, they seem to be very high on. They've had Carlos Dunlap for years.
Obviously, you got
Geno Atkins. Carl Lawson, when he's been healthy and been on the field, he was a steal that they got in the 4th round. So they do have a good, interesting defense. Like they've never, although they've been having problems stopping the run the last couple of years, they've been a very solid defense. And part of that might be scheme and linebackers, and as they get more guys in there, they might be able to compete for a spot and maybe fix some of the problems that they had when Lamar Jackson made them all look like they weren't actually football players. They also took edge rusher Khalid Kareem out of Notre Dame, and not a big name, probably more of a hope he fills a role kind of guy. Again, and actually in this draft they took 3 guys from the Senior Bowl, like I mentioned before. That seemed like a big target of theirs. Like, hey, guys that we got to meet with, guys we get to know. 2 of them they didn't really coach. Like I know Wilson they didn't get to coach. I don't remember which other one they didn't get to actually play with. But again, interviews we got done with them. And they also took Hakeem Adeniji out of Kansas. Is a tackle, has tackle guard flexibility. I actually thought they'd go offensive line earlier, especially with the guys who were in this draft and how deep this draft was. What'd you think?
I think that they're counting on Jonah Williams to come back and be a big part of the offensive line at left tackle, kind of protect Burrow's blind side. But I think Adeniji can probably play anywhere on that offensive line where you need him. He's a 4-year starter. That means you generally know what you're doing. You're smart. You know how to be an offensive lineman. He's athletic. He's strong. I think that you can put him pretty much anywhere besides center because that's obviously a different skill set. But you put him anywhere else, and you can lock down both sides of your line.
And not only that, but I think they feel comfortable at center. They have Trey Hopkins there. They did draft Billy Price to be their center. That didn't work out, but they lucked out with a little bit of diamond in the rough kind of deal with Trey Hopkins. Billy Price might be competing for a guard spot, or he might be traded away for a conditional 7th-round pick next year. We don't know. But again, that O-line's very much in flux. And again, it seemed like there was an attack in this draft for some teams to go after certain O-linemen to help fill out their rosters. I was more shocked that they didn't try to do that just because, again, you get a rookie quarterback. One of your biggest problems last year was your O-line. You get rid of Cordy Glenn. Because Cordy Glenn and the team did not seem to get along, and neither did his concussions get along with the team. But they seem to have been targeting still, like, all right, we're going to go linebacker. They got 1 tackle / guard. I don't know how I feel about this roster going into this year, to be honest. How do you feel about it?
Well, I think that, yes, they probably should have gone line earlier, but I think that they just saw guys that were higher on their board that they probably didn't expect to fall to them and had to take them. Like, just you can't pass some of these guys up. I think if you can get T. Higgins 2nd round, maybe not that one, but if you can get Logan Wilson 3rd round,
yeah,
I think they just couldn't bear to pass it up. And Adeniji is probably not worthy of a 6th-round pick. I'd say he should have gone earlier, so I consider it a steal. And I think they probably could have gotten him, or should have gotten him earlier, but the fact that they didn't makes it excusable. With the roster in general, I think that their offense is going to be a pretty high-powered offense considering where they were last year. And yes, defense is going to be a struggle, especially just because of the conference they're in and their schedule. But I think that they can grind out probably between 4 and 6 wins, which is an improvement.
My question is, does Zach Taylor survive that? If he only gets 4 wins this year, is Brown okay? Is Mike Brown fine with them losing, having another losing season? After he got rid of, everybody was making fun of Marvin Lewis for never being able to seal the deal, but at least a guy who got them to the playoffs consistently. Now you get this new guy, a young guy who you're hoping to kind of like. I think the intention with going after Zach Taylor was try to go for a rising star before anybody else goes for him and get him on the cheap. That would seem to be the plan here. Now you're hoping that that's the case. Now his star will shine through the mustard and mayonnaise, and eventually he'll rise up to be a true ham sandwich. I don't know why. I'm not even hungry right now, but I'm using a lot of food metaphors describing Zach Taylor. In fact, Zach Taylor ham. There we go. I didn't even think about that. Why is that not one of the things I've said so far? So anyway, listen. I think I think you're right about one thing. They went for the guys who were highest on their board, who they felt were falling values. Right, Akeem Davis-Gaithers, athletic linebacker, probably more of a will. Logan Wilson going to be the quarterback, the future quarterback of your defense. And again, positions where you had needs anyway, but also players who you felt very highly about. And I think with that in mind, I think I kind of agree with you though that this is a team that's not going to have a winning record. They're in a rough division. There's pieces missing that I think are going to make it hard for them to be a high-powered offense. I know that they were saying we don't want to pick in the top 10 again next year or number 1 overall next year. I don't think that I think they're picking in the top 10 next year. That's at least my opinion on it. That's what I could see so far. And I that's not me being mean or rude about it as a division rival. I think there are pieces missing. I think it is a roster that's on the rise, and what they need to do is keep adding to it. And I at least like what they did in the offseason of adding pieces. They actually were active in free agency a little bit. And again, I like their safety core. I guess Evans is the safety over there, good free safety. And as they add more pieces to them, it's going to get better. And no, maybe the idea is, listen, maybe we're going to take a loss this year. We'll be high next year. We'll get another piece on that offensive line. I don't like Bobby Hart as your starting right tackle. That's kind of the big worry for me. But any final thoughts on this draft as far as what they did or this team as far as what they did in free agency, or anything that they should be doing maybe going into the future as far as listen, we're still kind of in a weak spot. We should probably do X, Y, Z.
Well, I just wanted to address your earlier point about Zach Taylor surviving or not surviving a 4-6 win-ish season. I think that it all is hinging on how Joe Burrow does. If Joe Burrow does well and the reason they lose is just defense, then I think he gets at least one more year. If Joe Burrow is constantly under pressure and is constantly pulling turf out of his face mask, I think Zach Taylor's gone after this year. But I do have a slightly bold prediction. I think that they are not going to be last in their division. I think either the Steelers, which is my more likely candidate for this, or by a long shot, the Browns are going to be last. I think it's the Steelers. Don't yell at me. I think it's the Steelers, but I think that they might be third.
I wouldn't yell at you. Believe me, given the Browns' record over the years, I definitely understand why people would think that. But keep in mind, I think the Browns had an idiot for a head coach last year, and they went 6-10. So, given the state, I can't imagine Stefanski's worse. So. No. Maybe I think I'm more leaning maybe towards the Steelers. I do actually think the Bengals, only because it just seems like the roster that there's not a true complete strength, right? I can at least point to the Steelers defense, right? The Steelers defense last year played out of their mind. I do think the offense is going to have a lot of question marks next year for the Steelers, right? They, Ben Roethlisberger coming back. Does he come back from Tommy John very well? They seem to have a thing going on with Juju Smith-Schuster where they're probably not going to re-sign him, and that there's going to be a falling out with the team or something, and maybe they trade him even for a pick. They got a lot of young receivers in that receiving core, and they lost Ramon Foster. So again, more and more on that offense is kind of depleting. They no longer have Munchak. They feel good about the team, but I feel like it's a team that there's not. The only thing I like about the Steelers, though, is the defense. Now, defense can fall apart, right? They lost Javon Hargraves to free agency, went to the Eagles. They still have Cam Hayward. They got Bud Dupree. But Bud Dupree's on a franchise tag, so even that's a thing that can that could be fluid. They could trade him. He might hold out and not be as good of a player into the year. The main player on their rosters who seems to be the future of that roster is TJ Watt is really good.
Yeah.
Even I'm going to say TJ Watt is really good. So, again, thank you for coming on. Thanks for giving your thoughts. I apologize again for the audio issues the last time.
Don't worry.
And I appreciate your thoughts on this. Again, I think this is I appreciate the opinion. I like the perspective that you're giving me here, And I kind of, maybe I do get surprised. I just don't see the Bengals having a true thing that they are uniformly good at, unless I am shocked by their offensive line. By the way, love Joe Mixon. Have him on my fantasy team every year.
Yeah, I
So
like him too. After Michigan, it's a home. I'm an Oklahoma fan, so Mixon was pretty good.
Mixon is, and that's why, I like Mixon. I think Mixon is one of those running backs that, even if you have a bad O line, and we've seen this, they've had a bad O line, he does make them look pretty decent. He's kind of the next. He's probably like that next coming of Le'Veon Bell kind of level player. The problem is they just have not given him enough to be that level good. I still have my qualms and questions with Zachary Taylor. But apparently, and maybe it was the formula this year. That's why they went this direction with it. Thanks again for coming on. Thanks again. It's Coby Rich, everybody. And again, maybe I'll talk to you soon. And thank you again, Coby, for coming on once again. Very, very good job. Again, he should have been on for the Eagles and Baltimore Ravens episodes, but hey, I'm an idiot. Anyway, let's move on to the Carolina Panthers, right? Once again, thank you, Coby. Carolina Panthers, headed by Matt Rhule and Marty Hurney and Dave Tepper, the trio, the triumvirate, if you will. And here they are. Marty Hurney, Dave Tepper goes ahead. He gets rid of Ron Rivera. He's keeping on Marty Hurney for a while, but he goes ahead and gets a college head coach in Matt Rhule. And I was a little skeptical at first about Matt Rhule, right? I was like, he's a college coach. Well, he's maybe he's coached in the NFL 1 or 2 years at O-line. And then, I actually like the interviews with this guy. I like hearing him speak. He seems like he really believes in his players. He has a decent amount of investment in them. So I kind of like how this guy's going about it. And he stayed connected with all of his players. And I think this is common for college coaches, right? You're developing guys, so you build a different kind of relationship than, say, when you're in the NFL and it's a working relationship. And not that it's not a working relationship in college, but you've built a different kind of relationship. It's a mentorship a lot of the times, and it feels like they get more invested sometimes. It felt like he was very invested in his players, and he's looking to do that here, which I think is an interesting mentality, right? One of the things Matt Rhule says, it's very you'd be amazed at the things you do when you aren't worried about what other people think of you. It was kind of to that extent, and I thought that was a very keen thought process. He's not really worried about his reputation in the NFL because he really didn't have one. So as we get into this, let's go ahead. We'll get into the draft. Then we'll go a little bit into their free agency and their roster. But right off the bat, first round pick, right? Pick number 7 overall. They take Derek Brown out of Auburn. Very big, high motivated leader, political aspirations. They mentioned political aspirations. I was a little bit shocked by that. Not shocked because I don't think an NFL player. I just was like, oh, already? Wow. Dude, man, right into the NFL, and I'm like, next I'm going to be a senator. It's like, awesome, man. Good on you. I like that. I like that in a player. I like that in a person, right? It's just like they have a plan, and they have a place where they want to go, and this guy has ideas, and I like that, man. So, yeah, he was dominant at Auburn. Matt Rhule mentions how he's a physical force, dominated the entire year in the SEC against the run and the pass. Yeah, I do think there are some evaluators who say, his pass rush ability might be more middle road, like Akeem Hicks kind of level. But even still, you know what? This is probably one of the safest guys to draft in this class. You just know what you're getting out of him. At least, that's kind of what you get. You know what you're going to minimally get, and maybe his upside might not be as high as some other players, but you know what you're getting. And, again, he's a tremendous interior presence is what they've said. He's a leader. He's just and Matt Rhule mentioned, in his interviews with him, was like, dude, the great thing about the COVID thing was that, you could hop onto a Zoom call and get to know them in a different way. So, when the Jordan documentary came out, you just pick up hit the Zoom call and be like, yo, so, what'd you think about this? And Matt Rhule made a very big deal about liking the less formal processes of this and getting to know guys as players and as people. And I like that. I think that's a very interesting concept. I'm not sure he's the only guy who's ever said that or done that. I know Pete Carroll's another guy who's kind of like that, but it was very thought-provoking that he was like, no, I actually like that. It was more casual to be able to just hit it up and be like, so what kind of movies you like, kind of deal, and be able to kind of warm into what it's going to be like to live and work with this player for the next 4 or 5 years of his life. So there was a rumor coming out. I don't know if it's true. It was reported by The Athletic that Matt Rhule actually wanted to trade down from 7. Maybe they had an offer. Maybe they didn't. Maybe this was just a discussion. But he was very eager to trade down from 7, accumulate more picks, and try to build up this roster. Marty Herney apparently overruled him, which, aside from the potential pun there, is kind of odd, right? Because you thought, like, Matt Rhule, part of the whole, him coming to the NFL had to be his way or the highway. And there was even talks of Marty Herney being replaced by Andrew Berry in the offseason, and that Marty Herney was not here for the long haul. So it was kind of intriguing that Marty Herney had, if this is a true story, that he had the ability to overrule Matt Rhule regards to the Derek Brown pick at 7. As a GM, you'd want to have that ability because you're like, listen, man, this is my reputation's based off of drafting. Your reputation's based off of coaching, and I'm going to draft you the players. And I feel like this is the safest thing we can do is take this guy. I'm very interested to see if this is true or not. Again, it's a report. If there's already a little bit of dissension in the ranks, we already know Marty Herney's probably not there for the long haul. So how quickly does he get out of the building? Is he going to be retiring this year or next year? Is he going to be, is there going to be like, hey, Matt Rhule wants his guy in there? Or they're going to go look for another guy, given that, more recently, this has been the time of year to go ahead and get rid of your general manager and recruit a new one. Except for a few exceptions in recent years, it's been very popular to wait till after the draft and then pick a new guy. I think it might be better if you just get rid of him right away, in some regards, because you look at what happened last year with McCagnon. Like, you gave him a full offseason free agency in the draft. If you don't believe in a guy, you might as well get rid of him, is my personal feelings on it. Anyway, let's get back to their draft, though, right? It still seems like Matt Rhule was very much appreciated the pick. Like, he likes the player. I just think he had the idea, listen, if we had the potential to accumulate more players and picks and have guys under a cheap contract for a while, he would be very eager in that. So the upside is they definitely like all these players that they took, right? So we'll go to the next one. They go to edge rusher Gross-Matos. I didn't know his name was like my toast. But anyway, out of Penn State, edge rusher, big dude, 266, high motor dude. Matt Rhule talked about the production, always looking for guys who are versatile at pass rush. Like, it could be a 3-tech, could be an edge rusher. Could be a strong side defensive end presence. And they didn't think he'd be there in the second round. They thought he wouldn't have gotten out of the first, but they were like, dude, we got a shot. We got this guy too. This guy was basically a first rounder on our board in some regards, or we thought he was at least valued that high. They even looked at his high school because, again, like, they actually, the plus side of being a coach and having a lot of college coaches coming in here is that they were part of the recruiting process. So maybe it might have given the Panthers a little bit of an edge in vetting some of these guys who they might have already had a chance to recruit, talk to their guys, from the college ranks who they know in other schools, which everybody's done that. But, I mean, you're hearing it. That was a big thing that they had to rely on without face-to-face. But then you also got to look at their high school tape because a lot of these guys have already looked at their high school tape. So they're kind of, especially with Gross-Matos, they had two guys that already kind of worked with him, with Joe Brady, and they kind of tried recruiting him before at other schools, and they were like, listen, we kind of have an idea of who this guy is. So again, big thing about the Carolina Panthers, all defensive picks, right? All invested in the defensive side of the ball, not a single offensive pick. They made a comment that wasn't really the plan. But again, here they're building up on the defensive line. Something that Matt Rhule said is that, like, listen, you can't fix all the weaknesses, but what you can do is build on a strength. And if we're not going to be able to clear all the weaknesses year one, what we could do is maybe build up at least some partial strength here. And that's why they went D-line, both picks back to back, especially two very good high-end players. They seem to favor both these guys very well, and just build upon the depth on that defensive line. And then their third pick, again, like I said before, they're all defensive players. They went Jeremy Chin, safety out of SIU. And they mentioned seeing him at the Senior Bowl and that he was big, fast, explosive, smart, and he could play in press man. He was versatile. You could shut down tight ends and running backs. You could play him as a strong safety. You could play him as almost like a slot corner. Maybe you could even split him out wide. So good defender. He was a multi-year captain. You don't find many guys at his side and speed. They talked about him being a positionless player. Can utilize him in multiple places. This was something I thought was interesting as well because they talked about versatility the same way that Washington, Ron Rivera's team, talked about versatility, which was, hey, we're going to go ahead and get guys who, you have to figure out what the guy next to you is doing anyway. And this is probably a big thing in coaching, that you mix up where the guy's practicing to kind of get them an idea of the guy next to them's job, but also trying to get you on the field as quick as possible and having a vision. That's what Matt Rhule talked about, is having a vision of the ways we can use you. That's how he talked about Chin. That's how he talked about Gross-Matos. That's how he talked about Derek Brown. Like he was like, listen, we have a vision for you. That's why we want you. We have a specific way we want to use you in our scheme. And they traded a fifth to get up and get Chin because they felt like he was not going to make it there in the 6 picks they had left. Between their 3rd round pick and where he was in the 2nd round. So they said, you know what, we'll go ahead, we'll trade up. And they didn't want to take the chance that he wasn't going to be there because he was very high on their board. So these are 3 guys they were very high on. They really liked these players, and they believe they got true starters out of all 3 of them. Again, and they said, Rhule made a point that given the state of the roster and the way it's going, they're probably going to have to rely on their rookies a lot right out of the gate, which is good if you're in a rebuild mode because you're getting them experience of being on the field, right? It's not, you don't always want like 30, you don't want a bunch of like 80-year-old guys, especially if you're kind of rebuilding anyway. Then nobody's really playing in the NFL at 80, but you know what I'm talking about. So like day 1 and day 2, they were really impressed with the guys that they got. They think they got real true players. They're building up the defensive side of the ball, and we'll talk a little bit what they did in free agency in a moment. After we get done talking about their day 3 picks. But these 3 guys are very athletic, have a high upside, specifically with Gross-Matos and Chin, and then Derek Brown was a very safe floor, but also a very big presence on a defensive line. You know what you're getting out of him. So those 3 players are going to be very, very impactful, especially year 1, because again, and they also mentioned a thing of wanting to have a cycle of guys. You're going to hear more about some of the defensive players that they took. They want to have a cycle of guys on the defensive line who they could play at multiple spots. On day 3, their first pick on day 3 was Troy Pride Jr. They had mentioned not wanting to reach, like they went for Jeremy Chin, played safety. It was more of a safety role in their defense, but they said, listen, but that was the best guy on the board. We didn't want to wait and maybe you have to reach for somebody. And again, you want to take the best guy who, you don't like. It was funny because this is where Rhule talked about the concept of best player available, and he talked about best player available within reason, right? You're not going to reach for somebody right away, but they, again, with this pick, so Troy Pride Jr., they felt like they had a really good pick, right? They went ahead and they said, listen, he felt really good about him. He's from right down the road. In Notre Dame. Is very mature, played a lot of football, had maturity coming in, and because he also has a track background. He said, listen, track guys, they're pure, they're athletes, but they're serious about their athleticism. They're serious about their training. So when you go ahead and you get this guy and you go, hey, he has a regimen. He knows what he's doing. He knows he runs, X amount a day or how he works out. So getting a guy in like that, has the maturity and he's going to come into training camp and he's going to compete. Again, he ran a 4.42 and the scouts brought him up to him. They got to spend time with him at the Senior Bowl. They were like, listen, this is a perfect guy for what we need to do. And then what they're looking for at corner is between like 5'11" and 6 feet tall. They're looking for long, fast, athletic guys. But again, this is a guy who fit totally what they were looking for. Then came up Kenny Robinson out of West Virginia University, XFL guy actually, right? One of the only XFL guys who was up for the draft because of how his eligibility worked. He had a couple of issues at WVU, so that's why he went to the XFL. And they made sure to do groundwork on him, right? They spoke to his high school coaches. They talked to the head of operations at the school to see what happened. they talked to his XFL coaches because those are the guys who had the most recent experience with him and had been dealing with him in a professional setting. So that gave them a little bit of insight as to how he'll be in the NFL. They also made a point. I think Rhule made an interesting point, which was, you have to be careful with all the field issues, but with his issue, apparently a WVU, he was talking about, it was like more of an academic issue. He didn't hurt anybody. He wasn't like causing massive problems. So, they think maybe we all grow up, we age, we mature. So maybe that'll go ahead and he'll become a better person, right? They mentioned his unique ball skills and his play at both the college and pro level, and they were very intrigued by this player, and the fact that they got him in the 5th round was a really good deal for him. They got to vet him in different ways, and they made sure to go to different levels to go ahead and reach out to people. This was the first time, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, right? It was the first time in the press conferences they made a big deal about reaching out to the high school coaches compared to the college coaches, right? And they mentioned it for multiple players. I thought that was intriguing. I thought that was kind of an interesting, maybe you're seeing the growth and development over that time frame and how people talk about you and your reputation. Like we heard before with a couple of other teams, they deal with they think about the reputation of the school and how people there think of you. When you're looking at this, you're going, oh, well, wait a second. Now these people are talking to like high school, coaches and stuff like that. Maybe you're going to see a little bit more of the. And I don't know if they did it with every player or they only did it with players who, they had the comfortability of doing it with. But we heard it with at least 2 players, right? Then came Bravon Roy, who's out of Baylor, so we know Matt Rhule knows him, right? Big man who could play very fast and was initially asked about like one technique, right? Like he's a nose tackle, one tech, lines over the shoulder of the center, and or can really war over the shoulder of the center, maybe play a 0 tech if you're playing on a 3-4. But in this situation, he's more of a 1 tech. They were looking at his size and what blew Hurney out of the water, especially when he talked to Rhule and when they got to look at him at the East West Shrine game. And this was one of those things, again, about Matt Rhule's ability to, because he's a college coach, had a little bit more insight about a specific player, because this guy was not invited to the Combine, but he was invited to the East West Shrine game. So he made sure that Hurney saw him at the East West Shrine game and got to see a little bit of his versatility. They talked about having 7 or 8 guys who can all rotate and keep the team fresh. Add him to a rotation of Derek Brown and Yuta Gross-Matos and a couple of other people on their D-line, and Quan Short, that'll now have this very, very versatile, very athletic pass rush, both from the interior and the exterior of the defensive line. Again, they mentioned he's a really good athlete. I believe what Rhule said he had I thought he said he ran a 4.48, a 4.8 40, which was like, whoa, that would be really good. I'm not quite sure, like he might be fudging it a little bit because again, he drafted a player he knew from college, so he's trying to make himself sound good. But he's a powerful guy, and they mentioned you can't fix everything, but this helped them build upon a strength. You can make a specific strength, and here they wanted the strength to be the defensive line. Like, if they can't get all the corners they want, they can't get all the offensive pieces, they can't get the offensive line. And in fact, they said, like, yeah, we might not have gone for an offense. We might have went all defense, but that was not the particular thing that they were trying to do. 2 of the positions they specifically mentioned were offensive line and tight end. They were actually eager to draft. The players that they liked at the specific rounds did not fall to them. So they want a healthy deep room at defensive line, and they also drafted another corner, Stanley Thomas Oliver, out of FIU. Evan Cooper pointed him out to him at the Combine. Has all the skills of somebody that you might want to develop. A nice athletic corner. So again, another guy who's gonna come in, compete for a spot on the roster, and they were very intrigued about what he can do. So that was their draft, right? Very intriguing draft, all defense. It sounds like they're in this like kind of process mode, right? Year 1 of a new coach. I loved listening to Matt Rhule and how he talked about his players and how he seems invested in players, right? It's very much what you would call a player's coach, right? And talked about coaching guys up. Like if we're getting you at this level, and we know your sky level, your level's here. Like, we know what we can get you to. That's our job to take you in, coach you up. I like that thought process. Like, we're starting to see a lot of the innovation, and I like that with him. There's other coaches in the NFL. A lot of the new guys, man. This year has been the new guy innovation chamber. It feels like the new guys coming in seem to be bringing with them a level of innovation that, especially when you're dealing with COVID and this shortened off season, maybe shortened season, that they're intriguingly trying to figure out ways of, attacking it, if you will. So, I mean, Matt Rhule did hint at a more defensive-leaning draft in the presser beforehand. Spoke about a vision about how they wanted to build the defense. Again, I mentioned before, like, positionless players are a very key thing. By the way, one thing I noticed, Matt Rhule could totally be played by Kevin James in a movie about his life. That's all I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying Kevin James and him look alike. I'm saying Kevin James could play him in a movie. Very different things. Just like kind of heavy guy. He has a heavy-ish voice, but then like kind of oddly little light compared to what you were expecting. I was kind of what I felt with it, right? Kevin James has a deeper voice than him, but it was very intriguing to watch the interview, and I'm just kind of like, this guy reminds me of somebody. Again, talked about versatility, using them in multiple ways, having a vision. Chin can be used multiple ways. Gross-Matos can be used multiple ways. They want to know what the guys are into, right? And that's what, like I was saying before, they were talking about the video conferencing, less scripted, great move. Let's see. The key thing for them is they stuck to the process, right? Yeah, they went 7 for 7 with defense. That wasn't their plan. They were all on the same page the whole time. And, they were talking about the UDFAs. Like, dude, this is where we're going to get starters. Like Robbie Anderson, a guy who came out of Temple, who was a Matt Rhule player, came out and was an undrafted free agent, would reach back out to his college coach. And he's like, listen, we know this is where we're going to get players in in free agency as undrafted free agents. So let's talk a little bit about the offseason up to this point, right? So we know Joe Brady. I did a looking into the future with this team before. Talked about Joe Brady. His offense is going to be very similar to maybe a Sean McVay style offense. They extended Christian McCaffrey, right? When that happened, I did the running backs episode, and I said, typically I'm not for extending running backs, but when you look at a guy like Christian McCaffrey, there might be value there, right? You're extending him and he still has 2 years left on his deal. There's value to that. So when people were saying, "Oh, it's such a expensive deal," well, when you look at it, it's the 4 new years that have a lot of money on them. But when you look at it across the whole 6 years, on average, it's a lot cheaper. So that was something that I felt like needed to be pointed out with people who were talking about the Christian McCaffrey thing. Plus, what he gives you as a pass catcher, as a slot option, is very valuable. So I liked the signing. I liked the extension. If you can utilize him the right way and keep utilizing him the right way, I think extending him was the right move. I think he's one of the few that it is the right move because of what he gives you in the passing game. Hell, you could only play him at slot receiver, and he's giving you something more than your typical running back contract. And slot receivers in the NFL can go for $8 to $10 million anyway. So when you're expending that much on the slot receiver and that much on the running back, and by the way, now you're just paying it like $1 million more for the matchup problem that he creates. Oh, I felt like that was a good signing. So good on them for Christian McCaffrey. They signed Bridgewater, right? Teddy Bridgewater, formerly the Vikings, formerly of the Saints. Got his little bit of start last year. Plays. People keep on using the game manager mode kind of thing to say about him. Matt Rhule made a point, like, listen, man, I played against him when he was at Louisville and I was at Temple, and he was a good player. Like, he really appreciated his game back then too. So, he was very appreciative that they were able to sign him. Joe Brady, again, had some experience with Bridgewater when he was with the Saints. They think that he's going to be a good leader for them and help usher in this team into, what they want to make of it. So, Bridgewater they got for the right price, for the right deal, and that's just kind of how it all worked out. Bridgewater's price was like $20 million. It was perfect for him over 3 years. Great. Robbie Anderson, they went ahead and signed him in free agency. kind of, sets up the story of, hey, we wanted a fast receiver. He's got a good relationship with Matt Rhule. Like I said before, Matt Rhule seems to have really good relationships with people. Like, again, this is a player's coach. This reminds me of Jim Caldwell. If you took Jim Caldwell or a Doug Marrone, but you made them maybe a little bit more analytically sensitive, I feel like that's how you get what you get with Matt Rhule. And that's an intriguing concept, and that is not like there's not players coaches and but like it's an intriguing concept of having a guy who, yeah, he's a players coach, but he's also like into the whole, like, listen, this is what we're gonna do on fourth down. This is how I'm gonna, trading down, accumulate, trying to make your team better through this process. So I really like the interviews. I like where this team is going, right? I initially was really skeptical. Like anybody who, now I liked Joe Brady, and I even said I thought there was a good shot that they were going to go ahead and try to trade up for Joe Burrow. Granted, Bengals were never going to do that anyway. But I like Joe Brady. I think I believe what he's going to do as far as the offense goes. Coming from the Saints, coming from the LSU offense that went ahead and blew up the college football world, I think that they have a nucleus here of players that they can, players and coaches that are going to be long-term pieces of their organization. Also, what happened in the offseason, they traded away Trey Turner for Russell Okung, so they shore up their tackle spots. They got Taylor Moton on the right side. They got Russell Okung on the left side. A couple of questions at guard. That's probably why they were looking at guard in the draft, and they missed out on a guy or two that they really wanted at offensive line. So that happens. I do believe they have a lot of pieces there, right? You look at their guard. They have John Miller. He was formerly on the Bengals in the San Francisco. Taylor Moton. I feel like they're still trying to figure out the offensive line situation. They signed Schofield, formerly of LA Chargers. They got a couple of guys as far as UDFAs that they went ahead and attacked as far as for offensive line. Brandon Bowen, Mike Horton, Frederick Mauagoa. Bunch of again, that was. It feels like when they walked out of that draft, they said, "Okay, we went a lot on defense. Now use the UDFA process to go for offense. That's what we're gonna do." Their receiving room's amazing, right? Imagine having a receiving core of Curtis Samuel and Robbie Anderson. That's a lot of speed. Then DJ Moore, who is a great run after the catch guy, basically he's the closest thing that they've had to Steve Smith Sr. since he left. So now you have three receivers who are really good. Tight end is Ian Thomas, right? Basically, Ian Thomas, a bunch of Jags. I think that's why they were looking at potentially upgrading the tight end room. Didn't happen. They did trade away Kyle Allen, so it's really Bridgewater and Will Grier and P.J. Walker, former XFL star. And then, again, at center, they have Matt Paradis, guy who was formerly of the Denver Broncos, gotten in free agency last year. They've built up this team a lot. A lot of versatile, interesting players. Greg Little also is there, too. I just wanted to point that out. That offense is very intriguing because, honestly, because this is the thing that I had an issue with when you're telling me they're rebuilding, is I didn't think this is a team that really needed to rebuild. Like, there's some teams that you think, okay, like they could definitely use the reset button and potentially this might be a good thing. For instance, the Jacksonville Jaguars probably was a team that needed a reset button at that point because their team kind of aged out. They had the opportunity to get a couple of first-round picks. There were guys who just would not re-sign with them, so this was the time for them to go ahead and click the button and go, we're done, and we're going to go ahead and recreate what we need. Defensively is, I think, why they focused on defense in the draft, because you look at other guys who are on the roster, and they have Quan Short and Brian Burns, and that was about the extent of the guys who you really probably like. Again, Luke Kuechly left in retirement. They also got a Tahir Whitehead, who going to be a linebacker guy, kind of competing for a role. Shaq Thompson's probably the main linebacker there now, and it sounds like they're going to utilize a bunch of the safeties there. They also got Trey Boston, guy who they actually signed to an extension. Finally gets a real extension, not just a one-year deal. And then you look at their corners, Corn Elder, Dante Jackson. Dante Jackson's been pretty decent for them. And that's why they've been drafting a lot of guys who were like, in the late rounds for corner because they just didn't see one that was there on their board. Thought that was a good move on their end to try and attack that spot. And again, if you really are in this rebuild mode, it means that you're going to be competitive, but you're probably not making it all the way to the playoffs next year, and it gives you a chance to maybe get another guy next year relatively high. So, again, this is going to be a rebuild year. I actually don't think they're as bad as people think. I think the O-line in the corner room is the big question mark. I like this draft. I like what the mindset they went into this with. Like, again, and initially you might look at it and you go, that's a little confusing. They just went all defensive players. You look at their offense, okay, they went offensive players. I'm just more shocked they didn't trade down and accumulate picks or try to build up for next year. But they got a lot of great pieces here. So I liked it. I liked the draft. I'm more invested in Matt Rhule. Again, for me, I was very turned off by getting rid of Ron. I feel like he's like Ron Rivera if Ron Rivera liked analytics more. So, and Ron Rivera wasn't totally turned off from analytics, but he was definitely a different kind of coach than Matt Rhule looks at some of the stuff. Although, again, both talked about a lot of similar things, cross training, taking guys to their next level. I liked it. I like this draft. I like the players. I think there's a lot they can do here with this team. And that's it, man. That was both the Bengals and the Panthers. Tune in next time for where we do another team or two, right? And if you want to follow the podcast at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice_football on Instagram, you can follow me at BROJO. Death is in the end of life. Punch like that delicious drink. And follow, subscribe, comment, and sing. And look for the other videos. I've done a bunch of them. I'm going to put the playlist and a bunch of the videos in the, for the other teams that I've done so far. If you like this weirdness that I do. And,
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.